Imagine two classrooms right next to each other. In one room, all students receive the same instruction at the same pace, regardless of where they are with the material. In the other, students are grouped based on how ready they are for a specific skill or topic. Some receive extra scaffolding, others are pushed with more complex tasks. If you're an educator, you've probably seen both approaches. You may have used both yourself. Take a moment to think about a recent lesson. Were students mostly moving at the same pace, or did you intentionally group them based on what you noticed in their learning? The real question isn't whether ability grouping exists, but whether it's helping students grow, or quietly holding some of them back. In order to get more clarity, let's break down the essentials of ability grouping, what it is, when it can be useful, and the common mistakes that can turn it into something harmful instead of helpful. At its core, ability grouping is the practice of organizing students into small groups based on their current level of understanding or readiness for a specific task or subject. This usually happens within a subject classroom and is meant to help teachers tailor instruction more precisely. Think about your current routines. When you pull a small group to the back table or meet with a few students during independent work time, how are you deciding who joins you? Is it based on recent data, participation patterns, or a general sense of how students are doing? It's important to separate this from tracking. Tracking places students into different classes or pathways for long periods of time. Ability grouping, when done well, is meant to be flexible, short-term, and responsive to ongoing learning. When teachers use ability grouping thoughtfully, it can make instruction more targeted. Students who need additional support can receive it without feeling rushed, while students who are ready for more challenges can deepen their thinking instead of waiting. However, it is precisely here where things get complicated. Ability grouping can help or harm depending entirely on how it's implemented. On the positive side, small, flexible groups allow teachers to adjust pacing, focus on specific skills, and respond more closely to what students actually need. For some learners, working with peers at a similar readiness level can reduce anxiety and build confidence, especially when tackling a new or difficult concept. Additionally, when groups change regularly based on ongoing assessment, students aren't locked into one experience. Movement becomes normal and growth is visible. The risks appear when grouping becomes rigid. Try mentally listing the students who were in your lowest group at the beginning of the year. How many of them are still there now? What has made it easy or hard to move students between groups? When students are placed into the same groups for long periods of time, they can begin to internalize labels even when no one says them out loud. Students start to think, I'm in the low group, or I'm just not good at this. Those beliefs can quietly shape motivation, participation, and self-confidence. It could also happen that these differences are in fact said out loud, and it becomes a problem of identification, unhealthy distinction, and even sneer. Another risk is access. If lower groups consistently receive simpler tasks or less complex content, students may never get the opportunity to engage in deeper learning, even when they're capable of it with the right support. And for multilingual learners or students who struggle in one area but excel in another, ability grouping can hide strengths instead of building on them. This is why how we group matters just as much as whether we group at all. If you or your team have been thinking about ability grouping, here's some of the most common mistakes we've seen and how to avoid them to successfully support different learners. One of the 3 most common mistakes educators make is treating ability groups as permanent. When groups don't change, they stop reflecting current learning and start reinforcing past performance. Another mistake is labeling groups in ways students can interpret as value judgments. Even something as simple as colors or animal-inspired names can shape how students see themselves and each other. Neutral group names may seem like a small detail, but they matter more than we think. A third mistake is grouping students without actually changing instruction. Look at tomorrow's plan. What will actually be different for each group? Text complexity, scaffolds, questioning, language supports, or just how fast students move through the same worksheet? Simply placing students into different groups doesn't improve learning if everyone is still doing the same task, just at a different speed. Grouping only works when the instruction itself is intentionally differentiated. So what does effective ability grouping actually look like in practice? There are 4 essential factors that come into play. First, groups stay fluid. Teachers reassess often and expect movement between groups. Students understand that where they are today isn't where they'll always be. As you plan, consider the checkpoints you'll use this week to decide who needs more support and who's ready for a stretch task. Some options include exit tickets, quick conferences, and language samples. Second, instruction changes within each group. That might mean different texts, different scaffolds, different questions, or different levels of support, but not just different worksheets. Third, ability grouping is balanced with mixed ability collaboration. Even when students are grouped for targeted instruction, they still need opportunities to learn from peers with different strengths and perspectives. Open-ended tasks, projects, and discussions allow all students to contribute in meaningful ways. And finally, transparency matters. When teachers explain why groups exist and emphasize that groups reflect current learning needs, not intelligence, students are more likely to see grouping as a tool for growth rather than a label. But why does ability grouping matter for your classroom or school? Because this practice is not inherently good or bad. It's a tool. Unlike any tool, its impact depends on how it's used. When implemented thoughtfully with flexibility and equity in mind, ability grouping can support differentiation and help more students engage with learning at the right level of challenge. On the other hand, when it becomes fixed, labeled, or disconnected from meaningful instructional changes, it can unintentionally limit opportunity and reinforce inequities. The goal isn't to avoid grouping altogether to prevent labeling or insecurities. The goal is to use grouping in service of true student growth. If this all sounds like a lot, you're not alone. Ability grouping can feel overwhelming, and it does require intentional, structured effort. But it doesn't have to be scary or complicated. You can start with the following concrete moves. First, audit your current grouping practices. Notice who tends to stay in the same groups over time and who moves. Second, set a clear goal for fluidity. Make it explicit that groups are temporary and that movement is expected. Third, design at least one level-up task. This is a task that allows students to move into more complex work as they're ready. Finally, build in a regular reflection routine. Revisit who has access to which tasks and what adjustments are needed. For instructional leaders and coaches, this work can happen in walkthroughs or professional learning community time. Look not just at whether groups exist, but at grouping patterns and task access, especially for multilingual learners. If you want more insights for creating ability groups that really foster multilingual learners' development, visit the link in the description to read the full article on our website. Become part of the Ensemble learning community by sharing below. Have you ever been involved in ability grouping, whether as a teacher or a student? How was your experience and how could it be improved? And don't forget to subscribe for more educator insights and share this video with a colleague who's passionate about helping multilingual learners thrive. Together, we can create classrooms where every student feels connected to their environment and confident enough to speak up and learn.